Welcome back to the International Conference on Geographical Studies 2022. I would like to introduce the moderator for the first plenary session of this event. She is the Associate Dean for Administration and External Affairs of CSSP, and she is also a member of the PGS Board of Trustees. Please welcome Professor Darlene Osenia Gutierrez.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Kathy. I hope everyone is settling in for today's conference. Welcome to the first plenary session of the International Conference on Geographical Studies 2022. My name is Darlene Osenia Gutierrez, a Philippine Geographical Society board member, and I will be your moderator for this session. This morning, I am honored and privileged to introduce our plenary speaker, Dr. Dawna Cerney. She is a geographer whose work focuses on 5 areas: landscape change and conservation, environmental design, geography education, equability in geography workplace, and promotion of professional geography. Her training and knowledge in landscape change, ecological function, and resiliency frame an understanding in many areas of her professional work. She specifically examines landscape-level structural change and alteration of ecosystems within complex landscapes under compound environmental pressures. Dawna is deeply passionate about the promotion and understanding of geography as a professional field and is centered on promoting and educating the public and professional educators on the robust and critical roles that geographers play in business and government. Dawna is an associate professor at Youngstown State University, where she teaches courses related to physical geography and environmental design. Her work as the conference director of AGX, formerly the Applied Geography Conference, as board member of the Annals of the American Association of Geographers, and as current chair for the AAG Mountain Geography Specialty Group, centers on establishing mechanisms to bring accurate understanding and greater awareness of geography to the American population. Our dear participants, please join me in welcoming Dr. Dawna Cerney as she gives her talk entitled Post-Tuan Landscape Potentiality, Emotions and Perceptions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello everyone. I hope you can hear me. Please somebody give me a thumbs up if I am audible. Is that a yes? All right, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Osenia Gutierrez, for that generous and very, very kind introduction. I also want to thank the technical team for their Herculean effort to get me on board today so I can speak with you. The irony is I am the conference director for another conference, and we went through this 2 weeks ago and managed to work things out, but now I'm having trouble today. So I'm on my phone. I hope that you can hear me. If anybody wants to have the PowerPoints that were supposed to accompany me today, please feel free to send me an email and I'll be happy to send you a link with the PowerPoint. So today I want to talk about post-Tuanian landscape potentiality, emotions and perspectives. And this is coming out of years of working with students and years of working with the public in terms of understanding what geography is. And I want to start with understanding that we had a dovetail moment in time when Tuan was busy really getting an underpinning of his work established in the late 1970s. And his work was a counterbalance to the quantitative revolution of the 1950s and 60s. And we really needed that because that the material that was coming out of the 70s with the quantitative revolution was really important, but was missing critical aspects of what made a landscape heartfelt, authentic, and sincere, and that's where humans land. The expansion of technologies, particularly GIS and remote sensing, through the 1980s and through the 1990s, up until today, has been absolutely astounding and started leading to the push into bigger and bigger data. We now talk about big data all the time and the criticality of big data and what it offers us. But what that's done is produce a massive shift in education, a massive shift in awareness, where we've focused almost exclusively on data, forgetting the importance of the data that comes out of your intellect, out of your heart, out of your understanding of being in landscape, in being with people. So that created not just a shift in the research that we do, but the shifts in education. And of course, we all know that we don't get to where we are without some education. And if we don't prepare our young people for an education that is holistic and allows us to put a lens on all the aspects of what a landscape can be, then we're going to miss criticalities of what that landscape is. It's going to create bias. We're going to then have ethical and value issues attributed to those landscapes. So we've had a data-driven analysis for the last 30 to 40 years. And even though we've celebrated Tuan that entire time, we've seen him disappear from the environment to a large degree in terms of that intellectual environment in universities. So we wanted to bring back a perspective that works in conjunction, that produces an unbiased or a value-free landscape. We think that data is unbiased or value-free, but that perspective is wrong, and there's a lot of research that demonstrate that it's not. In that, then, we have to ask ourselves, is big data good data? And our perception is to believe that if it's big, and we can collect a lot of material, and we can collect more and more nodes and points and information on that landscape, that it must be complete. And if it's complete, it should offer us a full cohort of analysis. But that full cohort of analysis doesn't measure what people's sense of place is, what their sense of value in that landscape is, and what drives people to do what they do in landscape. But more importantly, what we do in terms of making decisions on our landscape. So data quality isn't always questioned when we just talk about big data. And what we're finding, in fact, is that students seldom look at data and data fidelity. They believe that if you have a data set, I can plug it into my GIS platform, Esri or Maptitude, or whatever platform you're using, and what comes out the other side is going to be of high quality. And students then often also get confused with the difference between what data is and what is reported as data, not seeing a difference. So the understanding of what is happening in the models that we're producing then becomes lost. There is no understanding and no questioning. Is what I'm seeing authentic? Is all the information that I need here? Is the right information that I need here? Students aren't getting that. What we then need to ask is all data that we're getting good data? And there's a meme that you may have seen floating around the internet the last couple of years, and it's a big jumble of Lego and different colors all over. And the meme says, "This is data." And then it says that what you should do with data is sort it. So then you have piles of different colored Lego, a black pile, a yellow pile, a green pile, and so on. And they say, this is what we do with data. We sort data. And then we're going to arrange the data. And then we're going to physically present that data for an audience. And then we're going to explain it with a story. And the last thing that they show us with that meme is a lovely building that's been put together. But what ends up happening is the story drives how we're going to visually present the data, how we're going to arrange the data, and then how we sort the data. And a good geographer says, we don't want to sort data because we want to know how it's distributed on the landscape. And that's just base level data. We want to drive deeper than that. We want to know where this data is coming from. And we need to ask ourselves, is the right data being collected? And is there bias in collecting that? So we really have to question what data is in the first place. And we start with making decisions on the association of how is that data collected? Who's collecting it? Why is it collecting? The geographer is asking where and when is it being collected? Those questions are going to ask questions on collection and management of that data, how data is analyzed, and then how it's communicated. So we must start with that first. So we then ask who is associated with that Lego and who or what is being served by the data that has been moved forward, by the data that has been collected. So that brings me then to the understanding of landscape potentiality, where we have the conversation with the title of our discussion today. So what geography are we undertaking when we don't question what is being observed and what is at the heart of the data? That heart being that collection, analysis, and communication. So we've got to put geography at the center of that data and then really think about more than just numbers. We need to think about the data that becomes authentic. And I want to dive a little bit later into philosophy and into actually quantum mechanics to recognize where we're understanding data in a much more contextual place. So Tuan's landscape of potentiality, or the potentials that Tuan brings to us, is to ask, are we numb, or how have we become lost in and no longer in touch with geographical and spatial work because we're no longer resonating with our senses? Are we looking at data and not thinking about how does this data make me feel? What is the delivery of information that leads to a hollow sense or no emotive expression in that data? We become autotrons. We go to work, we plug our data in, and magically on the other side of that data, we get a result. Do we feel that the result is authentic or accurate or not? We've got to tap into the intuition behind whether or not what we're getting is true, and then back engineer it, if you will, to where that data is landing. So I want you all to question, is there a loss of authenticity with the data that we're collecting and how we're collecting that data? Or worse, do we even know if there is something missing with that data to question its authenticity? And what problems does this cause for people and places if we're not actually manufacturing a recognition of authenticity? If we're not doing that for ourselves as the analysts, then the folks that are relying on that data and then our output models, our understandings, isn't going to be met. Someone's likely going to be harmed by that. So what then from that is, if authenticity is going to come from an experience of understanding, and that understanding is coming from our senses, then we have to ask what our senses are. And our senses start with a condition or an event that happens to us, and our emotions should resonate with, how do I feel about that? What does that give me? We get in touch with, I'm at a park and I'm enjoying the birds, and you should be able to identify what that emotion is. And that emotions will then, those emotions are multifaceted. They're really, really complex. And most of us are unaware of what those complex emotions are. emotions can manifest consciously or unconsciously. Most of us go around our lives pretty unconscious of our emotions, but we start to recognize what's happening with our feelings. The consciousness is expressed in an emotional reaction to that condition or event, to the singing of the birds, or maybe the counter to listening to noise in traffic and honking of horns. Does your anxiety go up? The feeling of anxiety that we had about a half an hour ago when the internet wasn't working for me, that was a lived experience. And that feeling was the emotion of, this isn't going to work. So the same thing in your landscape. How are you feeling? And we act upon our feelings rather than acting upon our emotions. As geographers, what got you to become a geographer or spatial analyst? And this is a question that I authentically want to ask you. We don't make our decisions in a vacuum. Something brought us to, I'm going to be a geographer or I'm going to be a spatial analyst. And that's a feeling. That feeling could have been, I was really upset about what happened to my favorite place on the beach, and that motivated me to want to protect that landscape. Or I felt exhilarated by the wind and the force of the high pressure cell that was coming through the system as it was going to bring a rain front. And that caused me to want to look at, environmental conditions from a spatial context. But something moved you in an emotional way to make you choose to be a geographer. And that's on the big scale. Every time we make a decision to research or study or investigate something is driven to that same scale of, what am I going to do with that? So I want you to consider what motivated you to work as the geographer or the spatial analyst. And that came from an emotion, that came from a feeling. Ask yourself, what did you feel? Was I exhilarated? Was I scared? Was I angry? Was I frustrated? And I want you to ask yourself that, because I want you to be able to tap into, what do you know about what you feel? Most people nowadays, because we live in exceptionally busy worlds that are really demanding of us, we have narrowed down our ability to communicate and understand what we feel. Most of us work in, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad. We don't get any deeper than that. We want you to move into deeper and deeper understandings of happy, mad, or sad to really understand what you're feeling. So when I think about what motivated me to become a geographer, it was a trip to the Grand Canyon when I was an undergraduate, and looking at a picture of that day when I was first standing in front of this massive, massive canyon, I felt happy. But as a young 21-year-old, I realized I'm looking at something in that happy lexicon that says, I'm really interested in this. I feel accepted by my peers because I was amongst other geography students, and I felt really optimistic. And the interest, acceptance, and optimism then allowed me to be curious and inquisitive. And it made me feel not just accepted, but valued amongst my peers and inspired. And that's how I got to geography. And I hope that when I'm being driven to ask good questions, that I'm being driven deep enough to know what's producing, what's moving me. So when we think about what moves you or what doesn't move you, or what you understand, it brings me to recognize what Tuan once said, which was, people tend to suppress that which they cannot express. So if I can't express excitement or enthusiasm, then I'm going to suppress those feelings. And if I suppress those feelings, they're still happening, but they're going to drive the analysis that I do at a subconscious level. And so the worry is that if there's a bias within an individual and they're not aware of that bias, that's going to translate into the research that they do or the analysis that they do. So this is a really, really subtle root of bias. What it's going to do is it's going to limit our ability to question our motivations. And therefore, if I don't know what's motivating me to ask the questions or to dive into the data right, I'm not going to do a good job of collecting data. I might ask the wrong questions in collecting data. I may miss data that's really important. I'm not going to manage that data right. And then if I'm starting at that platform, then definitely the analysis isn't going to be where it needs to be. And the communication may be well received, but I could still be biased in how I communicate that work, even if it's really good research and good work. So that's going to then influence how that affects ourselves, but it's also going to affect others. And it's going to then iterate into the emotions and feelings of others and how that's resonating. So with that, Tuan notes that culture, environment, and topophilia inform our values and our sense of place, and that in itself can produce implicit bias. So our landscape produces bias based on our interaction with that. But that inner dialogue that we are unaware of is going to produce a bias also. So this is really, really insidious when we're unaware of our feelings associated with place, with culture, with environments. That becomes a problem for geographers and anybody else working with spatial data. That then brings us to recognizing that those emotions that we have drive our value systems. What is moral for me? What has value for me? Where am I going to put my energy? And we have then an interrelated relationship between values and emotions. If I feel good about something, that's usually telling me that my values are being met. If my values are being disrespected or they're being bumped up in a negative way, then my emotions then will be turned off or will be turned negative. As my emotions feel good, then my values could change as well. If my emotions become negative, that could also change my value system. So these are really, really closely interrelated. And if your value system is driving how you analyze material or look at the landscape in front of you, then we might have something that we have to consider as a problem. So from that then, I want to bring us to this notion of idealism. Now, both in quantum physics and in philosophy, idealism is the recognition that the physical landscape arises from the consciousness. So whether it's an automobile or it's a building, a road, a dog collar, the idea of building that road or weaving that dog collar or producing a new fashion item came from somebody's initial idea. That was something that was non-contextual. It was inspired by something that predecessed it, but it came from an idea. And we take that idea, which may have been unconscious originally, and we can create a conscious action out of that. And that conscious action then is going to elicit emotions that are going to create feelings and then take physical expression. So if we're building a GIS model out of not recognizing what has motivated us on an unconscious level, then where that road may be produced is a physical manifestation of a bias that we are unconsciously aware of. So every human has created something with that idea first, and experience creates consciousness and unconscious emotions, and we're going to act upon our interrelated values and our emotions, and they're going to drive every decision that we make. Over the summer, and as many of you are aware, we had a big election yesterday. We had our every 2-year election for our senators and regional elected officials. And I live in a part of the United States where there's a lot of hot debate about how people are feeling, and their emotions are really, really strong. And I was in a parking lot, and there was a fella who was wearing a t-shirt that said "Ready for War." He was wearing his emotions on his jersey. And there was no question what he was feeling. But by the very act of buying that shirt, by the very act of putting it on, his emotions and his feelings became authentic and real in the real landscape. And if he feels strong enough, it may manifest into something even more tactile, and maybe in this case, something way more worrying. So if every human has started their creation with an idea, then and we act upon our interrelated values and emotions, that's going to affect the work that we do. And in that work that we do, we need to then come back to this recognition of our sense of place and our topophilia, and realize that experience of place and people are going to create a feedback loop. And that feedback loop moves through how we feel about ourselves and then how we feel about the places that we occupy. And those feedback loops imprint on places, on people, on conditions that we actually may not have any contact with, and worse, may not have any true knowledge of. So these feedback loops, and I will share this with Dr. Gutierrez, and because the loop is quite detailed, to give you all maybe a handout to have a look at this. But we know with Tuan, he said that our personal exposure to place is going to produce emotions, and that those emotions are going to then dictate what our sense of place is. That sense of place that imprints on other places which are similar. So if I love forests, which happens to be one of the driving factors to the geography that I do, then it doesn't matter what forest it is on the planet. I love that forest. I've imprinted my feeling of forest on every forest in the planet. Those imprints then create a bias of place for me. It doesn't matter if it's a healthy forest or an unhealthy forest. I have a very positive bias towards that forest. That perception then is going to influence my sense of self, and then that sense of self feeds back into the emotions of the personal experience that I'm going to have in place. So let me give you a counter to my positive example. So if you were raised in let's say the Bronx in New York, where there is a lot of crime and a lot of poverty, your sense of place probably has some really negative values and associations with it. There may be a lot of sirens going off. There may be a lot of violence happening around you on a day-to-day basis. That's going to imprint on your understanding of place. That may then translate to other cities. Whether or not you are aware of what the quality of life is in those cities, your perception may be similar. Those are places that have a negative connotation to me. We know then that imprint is going to create a bias, and that iteration can say, because I live in this place that is of lower quality or has problems or challenges, that's going to reflect negatively on myself. I'm going to have a rather low lens on who I am. That low lens will then dictate other perceptions that I have of other landscapes. So with that then, that's going to influence the sense of place of places that I don't even know. As a Canadian living in the United States, one of the early things that I recognized was my sense of bias as a Canadian, believing that we were peacekeepers everywhere, and that as peacekeepers, we were also very environmentally sound, which isn't the truth at all. It's one of the mythologies of being Canadian. We're not the stewards of the land that we think we are. But that turns the tide, and then I thought as a young person, if I'm a good steward, and this is how Canadians project upon the landscape, then other countries can't be doing as good a job as Canada is. And therefore, that's coloring my understanding of those other places. And it's going to bias those other locations, and it can bias the people and the activities that go on in those locations. So that bias that's created by sense of place and sense of self will influence what's of interest to me or what's not of interest to me, or what I value or what I don't value. And that's going to dictate the questions that I ask or the way I'm going to handle data. What am I going to include or what am I not going to include? And that's going to be completely unconscious. That's going to result in different spatial outcomes and understandings. And that's where this idea of potentiality is. I've created a potential landscape that wouldn't otherwise exist because I've eliminated unconsciously data, or I've added data or measured data in particular ways. So imprinting is going to impact the data. It's going to then produce an investment in that data. How am I invested in managing that data? Am I dedicated to it or am I not dedicated to it? What analysis am I going to take? Am I taking the right analysis or am I getting sloppy with it? That's all that unconscious bias, and that is going to affect the landscape that we care about. So how do we make sure that we are not making these unconscious biases that are taking place? Well, we've got to come back to topophilia in the classroom. We've got to allow young people to get back in touch with their feelings and ask the right questions. So what I've done over the last several years, mostly with my upper division courses, but I get to pepper it in my lower division courses, is ask them to dig deep about things that we don't normally discuss in class. And I give them a safe place to do that. You can share as much or share as little as you want, but I want them to deeply engage in class. And so one of the very, very first things that I do is I ask them about themselves. I get them to bring an artifact from home that's important to them. One of my current majors right now is a painter. She paints all sorts of things, and she brought a painting, and I ask the student, why is this important to you? And then you get to share a little bit of yourself. So different students bring different things, and they get to tell you, why is this important? And they're usually positive conversations. So with that, that makes the student feel good. From that, then we take students out into the landscape. We take them out just onto campus and put them in places that look rather benign. Tight little corners between buildings is one of my favorite places to put students. Most students will tell me, I move through across the landscape really quick here because it's tight. And once I get them to stop and ask them, well, what are you feeling here? Some students feel nervous, some feel it's cozy, some like the fact that you're hidden, you can't be seen, that they have anonymity that empowers them. And all of those discussions about one landscape and all the things that the students are saying, and allows other students to recognize, oh, I don't feel that way about this landscape, but my colleague feels something different. Why is that? What am I not getting in my experience that somebody's getting from their experience? And that opens up a whole different understanding of that condition. I then just move a few feet. It's often just a few feet of movement that it becomes important. And I ask, how do you feel about this? And all of a sudden they're on the other side of a tree, or they're around the bend from a building, and they're feeling better about communicating, and they can express, now I feel exposed, or I feel like I can breathe now. I feel like I can open up my arms where I can see what's around me. And the students right away start to see that we all have different experiences in these different landscapes. But then they start to see how the energy is moved through those landscapes, how people physically interact with those landscapes once we're in tune with how those landscapes make us feel. From that, I then take them and ask them to experience other landscapes. How does these landscapes then influence the occupant's behavior? So they get to see how they're influenced by the landscape and really question it. And then they start to observe how other people are interacting in those landscapes. And that's novel. Students don't get to think about that very often. With that then, with topophilia, then putting students and making them touch the earth and making them be aware of the tactile landscape as well as the emotive landscape gets them a little bit further in touch with that. And then we can start putting them in places that they're less familiar with, parts of a community that they would not otherwise go to, grocery stores, which they're unfamiliar with, or the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, what they may have gone to their department at home, but never spent any time in the Youngstown area, which is where I teach. And they get to see the different people who interact in that space, and they realize this doesn't look like home. This feels different than home, and it feels different from home because the building is different and the culture is different and the level of interaction between people is different. And then they start to realize not all DMVs are the same. Not all big intersections are the same. What am I going to do with this information? And from that starting point, and we move across the semester, and that semester of keep tapping into how are you feeling? What are other people feeling? Students start to ask far better questions because they become way more confident in looking at a landscape and asking, what is it that I don't know? What do I need to know? Should I be asking somebody else about what could be happening on this landscape? And that means they're going to collect data that they hadn't considered before, and they're going to think about how that data needs to be analyzed and who is my audience, who needs to know what's happening on this landscape. We're going to still push forward through an authentic story of what that landscape is, but who is the audience that I need to communicate with? Because I'm not communicating for myself, I'm communicating for somebody else who may not understand what's best happening on this landscape. So they start to critically consider the other and the authentic perceptions and realities of the other, not just themselves, and with that themselves as well. Recognizing what their biases for positive are, what their biases for negative are, and what do I need to know that I haven't considered? It gets asked all the time. So out of that, what that does is it offers the courage to open one's heart. And Gautier said, a man sees the world, what he carries in his heart. And one of the favorite things that I have seen over the last number of years is last semester's capstone work. I had 3 students in class. 2 of the students over 4 years hardly spoke at all. And by the end of the semester, they were speaking and their career trajectories had changed because of that. Dave Bertel, which is one of the students, the work that we did on capstone was in the hometown that he grew up in. He was like, I don't want to do this. I don't like my hometown. It has no value. It really is a crappy place. And once he started looking at his landscape differently, and once he started looking at the community members differently, he actually decided, I'm not going to move away from home. I'm going to stay at home, and I'm going to make an effort to make my home a better place for everybody that lives in here, because there is value in those people and there's value in the landscape. So it authentically changed not just the landscape that these young people are engaged in, but it changed how they felt that they were being seen and heard and how they were being valued. And in turn, they wanted others to be seen and heard and valued as well. And the landscape itself to be seen and heard. So if I was to come back to that idea of idealism, idealism hit me square right on the nose in 2016 with that federal election. And that year I got to meet an artist on campus named Dragnia Chernizak. I'll share her webpage with anybody who wants it. Dragnia is an artist who looks at cultural artifacts from Iceland, from Serbia, things like, I've lost the word now, embroidery, teacups and saucers, things that we recognize belong to a particular culture or not. She then deconstructs those artifacts electronically, bends them, pulls them apart. She's got emotion attached to that. And in doing so, she reconstructs those artifacts. And in doing so, what she unconsciously does is produces a landscape of that. Somebody who doesn't know what it is would look and say, this looks like it should be the side of a hill or a marsh or a forest with ponds, or it looks like a roadway, when what you're really looking at is a piece of embroidery or some knitting. And out of that, remember that idealism is the physical universe that arises from consciousness. What she has done is she's created matter. She's created art out of an idea. And she's physically created a picture of a landscape that didn't exist before, that was a teacup or was a piece of cloth at some other point. And that piece of cloth or that teacup was a cultural artifact. And it had deep, deep meaning. But when you put it in the computer, it has no mass. That data then, with no mass, then physically created art, which has mass, which has perception on the landscape, and now generates new emotions, which are going to then motivate people. So this is the work that Dragnia is doing, and she didn't know that she was doing it, and I introduced her to Post-Tuan. Together then, what we did was work on public space for art. And in the past, the work that she would do with students is go research, figure out what this is, who works here, what their history is, what their interests are, and we're going to do a painting on the side of this building or on this retaining wall. And once she read Post-Tuan, after I gifted it to her, and we spent time talking about sense of place, she embraced the cultural landscape much more fully. What was discovered was that we proved the community connections between the artist and the art and the citizens, but it improved the community connections between the citizens once that art was there. It changed the physical space and it changed the artists themselves. So with that, I think that that's probably a good place to leave it, because we are, for me, 9:20 at night. So we're kind of getting deep into the day for you. So thank you very much for spending some time with me today. Thank you for waiting patiently for me as we had some technical difficulties. I appreciate your time and attention, and I look forward to fielding any questions if there's time, or electronically in the future if you want to email me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dawna. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that very insightful talk that you have just given. We will now proceed to the open forum. We have some questions in the Zoom chat.
Oh, good.
But by the way, thank you for setting also the tone of our conference.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
So
Thank you for letting me join you on my phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just read some of the questions here in the Zoom chat. There's one here. Thank you for your interesting and inspiring autoethnographic-ish talk, Professor. I really do appreciate its warmth as it comes from your own personal experience. I am interested in the way which language intervenes within the pre-linguistic process or movement from our inability to express our emotions toward its very suppression. Could you talk more about the role of language and agency from Post-Tuan perspective?
Oh, I will do my best. I just had this conversation actually with my provost last Friday. language is very much the vehicle of understanding just about everything we do. We have physical artifacts that we recognize, but a physical artifact doesn't very well express emotion. And if we don't have the language for what we're feeling, then we're going to truncate what it is that is being expressed. So different languages and linguistic groups do a better job of translating what feelings and emotions are based on the landscape that those languages have come from. And my initial thought is what has happened here in North America to language as we are no longer interacting with each other. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just really quickly, we're no longer interacting with each other in common space. We're no longer interacting with space itself. And I think what that's doing is it has truncated, or it's reduced how we're able to express what we're feeling. And in doing so, I think we're going to flatten out those landscapes that we are theoretically in contact with, but more importantly, the landscapes that we're not in contact with, because we just don't know how to express what's going on in them. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you very much, Dawna. And we have another question here. No? Very interesting questions. And here it goes. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate this talk, even without the PowerPoint. It's just really wonderfully delivered. Thank you. Now, for the question, when you refer to being in touch, feelings and emotions, is it only a cognitive recognition of how we feel, or do you encourage also recognizing where and how we feel it in the body / somatically? That's one question. Okay, and there's another one from the same person. Okay.
Okay.
In facilitating / initiating introspection for a group of students, how do you handle varying or opposing strong emotions to the same landscape? Some people who have developed negative feelings about certain spaces that some have positive feelings due to different experiences. Let me see. For example, bullying in school, etc. Okay, so would you like me to repeat the first question?
Yeah, that would be very helpful, Darlene.
Okay, it is when you refer to being in touch, feelings and emotions, is it only a cognitive recognition of how we feel, or do you recognize, or do you encourage also recognizing where and how we feel it in the body or somatically?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. The sympathetic nerve system is so important, right? And we're learning through researchers like Brene Brown, who's very, very culturally popular right now. She's made it easy to make that understanding accessible. So I usually start with having students put their hands over their chest. How do you feel right here? Like literally, how do you feel here? How do you feel in your stomach? Because at some level, students who have disconnected so much have no idea how their bodies are feeling. And that conversation does get brought up immediately. What is the difference between feelings and emotions? And emotions are the physical context of pardon me, did I say that right? The physical context of what your emotions are doing. So if you're not aware of those feelings, then you're never going to get deep enough to understand what it is that you are authentically thinking about at that unconscious level that you're going to make decisions on. So definitely we have that conversation, and that's hard for a lot of students. About a decade ago, that seemed to be harder for for the young men in class. They didn't want to go there. But I'm finding that the last 5 years or so, the gentlemen are right there, willing and interested in knowing what's going on with them. So at least that's what I'm getting in Ohio and Pennsylvania with those students and students that are coming in from other parts of the United States. So yeah, definitely. We're taking some time, but you have to walk them through it for sure. And I'm not in psychology, right? So I'm being supported by my psychology faculty. If students are ever feeling overwhelmed, there's always an out. This is a safe place. So it's like, if this is something that's not feeling good for you, you can sit this out. No one's going to make you do something that you're uncomfortable with. And a lot of times, those students watching others do it is enough of a bridge that we're only there to allow students to get as far as they can in their personal journey. Second question on there was asking.
In facilitating or initiating introspection for a group of students, how do you handle varying or opposing strong emotions to the same landscape? For example, in parentheses, some people who have developed negative feelings about certain spaces that some have positive feelings due to different experiences. For example, bullying in school, etc.
Right. Yeah, thanks. That's when you read that the first time, my first thought was, and it's retained, is that I've really not had students which have said, I don't want to have any part of this. And I think that there is a gentle way of probably choosing safe spots for students to start exploring first. So I don't generally put students in really, really tight little areas in case they're claustrophobic. Or I won't put them in a landscape where the trees look like they're barren, because there's a lot of emotions with changings of seasons and things like that. So I'm very, very careful of not always choosing cheery, happy places, but places that feel safe. And I've walked around with other faculty members, and because I'm an environmental design faculty member as well, knowing where those safe places are from a psychological point of view is helpful. So if you're thinking about doing anything like this, definitely tune in with the folks in psychology and have an understanding of where traditionally people may have difficulty in whatever spectrum that is. Now, we want people to be a little bit uncomfortable so they know what those feelings feel like. But we definitely don't want to tip people over the edge, and we always want to give them the up. But I've never actually had somebody where they're, having a disagreement on space. They're generally really good at listening to each other. So that's when that happens, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Dawna. We really have very interesting and wonderful comments here for you. Let me read the next one. Really love the interaction drawn between sense of place and sense of self. This made me recall my reflection one time where I got hurt or insulted somehow because my friend had a comment on something about our home. I reflected that when people get deeply attached to places, an attack, compliment, comment on the place also becomes an attack, compliment, or comment on the self. The place becomes the self in some way. Thanks for the interesting thought.
Yeah, what I really love about that comment is this recognition of quantum physics, where everything is energy, right? In the quantum physics world. So if you have a sense of a landscape, that you're putting that energy out there, and I don't want to get too quantum physics, dive too deep into that, but that emotion carried into that space can hold that emotion for you personally indefinitely until you have another strong reaction in that space. Something really, really positive happens in that space for you. The two become so intertwined that they're indivisible. And I think that's an absolutely remarkable phenomena.
Okay, thank you very much, Dawna. No, I know there's still a lot of ideas and comments, no? But then, of course, we are also
Running a little tight.
Yes, yes. So, well, there's also a comment here. I like the thought. I got a lot of new ideas. Okay, so thank you.
Oh, good.
I'd like to thank everyone for their comments and questions. Okay. And since we need to proceed, no, and we will now present our certificate for you. And let me just read what it says in our certificate. Okay. One moment. Hindi nag-appear. Okay, one moment, please. Can I go? Okay, the Philippine Geographical Society and the Department of Geography presents the certificate of appreciation to Dawna Cerney, PhD, for sharing her valuable knowledge and expertise as the plenary speaker on the Post-Tuan in this conference. Post-Tuan landscape potentiality, emotions, and perceptions. In the plenary session at the International Conference on Geographical Studies 2022, with the theme Emotional Geographies, Passion in the Geographical, held virtually on November 10, 2022 at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City, Philippines. Signed by the following: Timothy James L. Cipriano, ICGS 2022 Coordinator; Fernand Francis M. Hermoso, ICGS 2022 Coordinator; Emmanuel B. Garcia, President, Philippine Geographical Society; and Joseph E. Palis, the Chair of the Department of Geography. Thank you so much, Dr. Cerney.